Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Mental Ramp. I'm your host, Priyanka, and we're about to uncover how our energy works and what it takes to maintain a balanced and sustainable lifestyle. We have a very special guest on the show today, joining us for the entire series of mental fitness, Dr. Perpetua Neo, aka Dr. P, how I like to call her, a clinical psychologist, alumni of UCL and Cambridge University. Dr. P coaches senior leaders, elite spokespersons, and entrepreneurs to achieve the most without burning out. Dr. P uses neuroscience to tackle the personal and other professional problems to burn mental energy. She writes for some really big names like mindbodygreen, ThriveGlobal, and she serves clients across 6 continents. I can go on talking about Dr. Perpetua, but without further ado, Dr. Perpetua, welcome to the show.
Hello, Priyanka. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited because I really love what you guys are about and how you want to dive deep into what is the truth of our health, which sometimes can be incredibly overwhelming and confusing with a lot of information out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of noise, and I really feel very grateful for having you today and clear the noise and clear the information and bring it directly to our audience. Now, um, I have a very high demanding environment around me, and I struggle all the time to keep up with my productivity. And I would like to know that today's topic is about mental ramps. So, if you can throw some light about mental ramp, what
Yeah.
exactly it is, and how does it relate to the way we manage our mental and physical energy?
Yeah. Okay, so imagine you've got your phone switched on and sometimes it gets really sluggish, right? And then you think, why is it so hot? Why is it moving so slowly? What is going on? Well, if you think about that and you extrapolate that to your head, that is what we call RAM. Sometimes too much things are going on in what we call your random access memory, and so things naturally move slower. Things feel very clogged, like on a highway where the cars are either moving really slowly or chock a block and just stuck there for a long time. So when we have a lot of things happening in our lives and a lot of things going on in our heads, because these two can be separate, one can make the other worse or one can make the other better, then what happens is our mental RAM becomes a lot. There's too many things, too many processes, too many things, too many demands chewing up our mental energy. And so I use that as an analogy because when you see your phone being very slow, you realize that sometimes your head can be really slow as well. And because, I talk a lot about neuroscience, the head can also run a bit like a computer as well as and then we're plugged into a lot of AI as well. So you want to think it in a slightly geeky systems manner, then we think mental RAM.
Just relating it with my situation as an entrepreneur, there's so much happening on an everyday basis, and I need to make sure that the areas of my priority get my full attention, where I should be most productive. So
Mhm.
now, how to treat my mental energy like a resource? How do I
So
manage that?
treat it as resource. That's the first thing. You have to treat it as a resource, okay? So one of the really big things is always check in with yourself. You don't need a fancy mood calendar or a fancy gorgeous tracker or whatever. Sometimes they actually waste time. It's more like asking yourself, okay, how am I today in terms of my head space, my head energy? Now, mental energy is firstly very important to know that it's very different from your physical energy. So, there were times in my life, like in the past few years when I was looking out for family health crisis, when I had energy to bike in the gym, like 8K, right? But no energy just to write 2 lines on my work. And I got really upset with myself. But that's the difference, is that the distinction here is that your physical energy is what your body can do, right? And sometimes, no matter how tired we are up here, we just power through a physical exercise. Some people even need a physical exertion to help them to sleep. Well, mental energy is different. It's about your cognition, how much resources your head can actually put in right now, your motivation, and so many other different things that are going through in your head, the ability to plan, the ability to be able to discern what I'm going to do first, what I'm going to delay in terms of the reward, the gratification. How am I going to be able to keep my emotions in check when, when you're really busy and you've got a zillion things piling up and everything feels difficult, and then your head tells you, but somebody else can do this in 5 minutes anyway.
Hmm. There's a very deep connection between physical health and mental well-being. And also, of course, there is further to that, how what we eat is connected with how we feel,
Oh yeah.
and so on and so forth. So that's a whole dimension to talk
Yeah.
about. But if you have to, share your invaluable insights on how the physical health is connected with our mental health, and then what does this mean, the entire interplay?
So I used to work for some time in hospitals in London, and the fact that there's actually a psychological medicine unit there helps us a lot. When people get diagnosed with chronic illnesses, so for instance, I was working HIV, and then when kids come in, they always have to also see a psychologist as well, because these two are intrinsically linked. So for instance, you get a diagnosis, right? It means that your identity changes. Um, your the way you see your life changes. Sometimes it's that aha moment, like, oh, so this is why I've been so tired, this is why I've been so grumpy, this is why I've been acting that way. You got to digest emotionally what's happened pre-awareness. That is maybe a bit of a stronger case here, but sometimes we like to use more glaring examples to help us understand. And then in our day-to-day lives, physical health is so important. So let's say, when I have a fever,
Mm,
to even walk takes effort. So if to walk takes effort, how am I going to feel about myself, right? When it's difficult even to compose one line in an email because I want to make sure I don't make a mistake.
mm,
And this is not even talking about perfectionist kind of tendencies. It's more about being professional.
mm,
So, and then think about the food that we eat, as we talked about, right? So after a very starchy, say pasta and bread laden meal. Don't get me wrong, I love them. And, it's not advisable to schedule heavy work in after that, because what happens is your blood glucose spikes and other different levels that you might not be able to track. But basically, this level spike, and then you get very tired, very sluggish, what you call the serotonin overload, or what people call that carb tiredness or carb sleepiness. So just on a very basic level like that, like our physical health, what's going on in our bodies can influence very strongly how we feel about ourselves, or what happens in terms of how we are able to manage or master our headspace. So, other variables that we can think about in terms of physical health, right, isn't just about am I healthy or not healthy. In women, as we know, that's hormonal cycles going on. And so, for instance, in many women, just in a few days before their periods,
yeah.
they tend to get clumsy, and they tend to believe all the horrible, catastrophic things that their brain tells them, because the hormonal levels have changed, right?
Yeah.
And if we are not aware of what's going on, we think there's something wrong with me. And if we believe these voices in our heads, then we follow them down the spiral. And
Mm,
then voila, how is that going to affect the way you work, the way you show up in an interview, the way you show up speaking to an investor, the way you show up working with your clients, or even say, you're doing your day-to-day admin. I can guarantee you that when your head, your amygdala especially, which is your fear center, is in a space of fight or flight, and you don't have to tell yourself you're feeling stressed, because a lot of us have no idea we're feeling stressed at all, right? So when that area is activated, then your prefrontal cortex, which is the higher part of your brain, the more advanced parts of us, gets powered down. Okay, and you're going to make a lot more mistakes. You're going to have a lot more messes to clean up.
mm,
Keep doing that. Tell yourself that everybody copes with that anyway, and these mistakes are going to compound in the wrong direction.
mm, mm. What should be the first step if someone wants to break this vicious cycle?
So the first step is check in with yourself, how you feel. Again, nothing fancy. It's more like, do I feel good, bad, neutral? Very, very simple. Okay. And the second thing is to acknowledge how you're feeling. So plenty of us, we are very, very scared of our feelings. Like, anything negative is bad.
Mm,
Well, well, I am maybe a psychologist. I may be trained in many different schools of psychotherapy, but I'm not the kind of person who will sit down and talk to you about your feelings forever, because I seriously have no interest in that. And that's just obsession, right? Feelings are important as data.
mm,
So basically, if my feeling is telling me I'm tired,
mm,
I'm a bit nervous, I'm a bit anxious, I'm a bit excited, I'm happy, great. What I have to do then is acknowledge how I feel. Because when I acknowledge how I feel, like a fact, then this takes my power back
mm,
rather than the anxiety is running over me. Then the third thing I would do is I would take 3 deep breaths. Okay. And while this sounds very, very easy, it actually is not that easy, because I've had clients who come and tell me, like, I've been to meditation retreats for a long time. And actually, to tell you the truth, I feel worse, but I never dare to tell anyone. Well, there's nothing wrong with meditation. But what's going on here is when we are anxious, we breathe wrongly. Okay. So, how, like, when you take a photo, automatically, what do? Do you suck in your breath?
yeah,
Yeah, because we like to look skinny, right? And when people are anxious and you tell them to breathe, you know what they do? They suck in their breaths.
yeah, yeah.
So when they breathe in, the tummy gets constricted, the chest then rises up and it feels really, really tight. And what happens to your brain when it picks that up in split seconds? Your brain goes, oh, she or he is anxious.
Hmm.
Let me send the cortisol, let me send the adrenaline down, you're going to feel worse. So, back to basics, everything really is basics here when it comes to human mechanics, right? Because you got a body, you throw on. Is that when you breathe in, put your a hand on your belly, try that, and then just imagine your belly filling up with air like a balloon, and then as you breathe out really, really slowly, imagine your belly deflating like a balloon as well. If you can do that properly for 3 seconds, then what happens is you got no energy to think about other things. And your brain resets.
Right,
That's all. All
right.
it takes is 3 seconds.
I think this is so useful and so easy as well. So, further to that, do you think that there is a certain way of doing it on an everyday basis, depending on the amount of perceived stress or depending on the amount of, I don't know, need
Oh,
based?
certainly. This is something that I prescribe to all my clients, and in almost everywhere that I record, in many places I write, and what I do myself as well. I've been doing this for, what, at least 9 years, 7 years, God knows. But basically, like, what I do is first thing in the morning when I wake up, 3 breaths. Before I sleep, another 3 breaths.
Hmm.
And then between stuff. So it's almost like, imagine if I'm using a table for many different things. When I switch function, and then I basically, what I do is, like, I wipe the table, right? If I'm eating on the table and I want to put a computer there, then I wipe the table. So this doing brain reset, that I call it, is basically me wiping my mental table to
Hmm.
clear it. And it's like really, like, for me it's very refreshing, because it's like, between, let's say, after you and I'm going to speak to somebody else, it's like I've cleaned it out,
Hmm.
so that I've got a clean slate for somebody else, so that nothing is too clogged at all. So there's absolutely time to do that. I design it in such a way that is so easy, because some people say take 20 breaths, some people say it's 5 minutes, but my high performing clients, they don't want to do it, nor do I. So, which is why, we break it down to three. And
Hmm.
other things, it's like I will tell people, it's like, okay, and if you don't really want to do it, most of the time, go to when you're in the bathroom and washing your hands, then do it. Everybody washes their hands. So
Yeah.
pair it with activity. So you have to make it so simple that the only obstacle standing between you and the action is you.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's also the mindset shift towards self care that basically governs this entire change in practice uh,
Yeah.
on a day to day basis. So you mentioned about something that we should do, and then if you want to, if I have to ask you activities that really drains us through and through. So, what would be those specifically those kind of activities which are high energy draining activities? Now, for example, I personally feel that with physical exercise, I gain mental clarity and I feel more
Okay.
sharp.
Hmm.
So, So that helps. But then on the contrary, if I like what you just rightly mentioned in the beginning, that high carb food tends to make you feel sleepy, there's a slump post such meals. So what do you think in that sense, what all other things would add to the energy drain, mental energy drain?
So mental energy drain, like one thing would be the jobs that are cognitively demanding on you that you maybe actually could at, but you don't like at all. Things that take energy away from you. And we all have got things like that in our work. So for instance, I may have somebody who's working in finance who's really, really good at numbers, but actually he doesn't really enjoy it maybe anymore or at all. But he's just really good at it and it pays the bills and it pays more than investments. But then he's at work and he's really enjoying building cultures, which actually is the main thing that gives him energy. Now, so basically one thing that I would tell all audience here is, don't shoot down the things that you actually don't really like, but you're grateful for, that you're good at. Okay, because if it takes away energy, it's important to note that, and whether you want to change what you're doing or not is another thing altogether. But sometimes our fight with ourselves about, oh, like this is taking energy away, this is good, this is bad, I am so ungrateful, this is the first world problem. This actually steals a lot of resources from inside us that we could do with keeping for ourselves. Okay. And other things that really drain our energy would be the environment around you. So now we're not even talking about, say, living in an uninspiring neighborhood. Because for some people, that's what they tell me, especially when they're starting their careers. And, for instance, in London, right? When you're starting a career, unless you got a lot of money or you got a friend who's renting a room out to you in a nice neighborhood, it's very easy to rent in a horrible neighborhood or just uninspiring dull neighborhood, right? And so, that can make your day a bit different, a bit sadder, right? So we're
Yeah,
not talking about that. We're talking about the people you hang out with. Do they inspire you? Do they energize you? Do they make you happy? Or do they, but this can feel a bit lofty, right? So then the question, as we bear down a little bit, as we investigate, is do they make you feel safe? Because when you are around people you don't feel safe, then your body is always walking on eggshells. And you may not be aware of that because some of us, like my younger self, completely disconnected from my body. No idea what feels good, what feels bad, could bear through anything, but then would fall sick big time many, many times. Okay? So be very aware of who keeps you safe, who makes you feel safe. And again, there's no judgment about what a good person or what a bad person you are. Because, like some religions, some codes of ethics tell us, don't judge. That was how I was brought up too. Okay. But, like our body has got its intrinsic wisdom that tells us what feels safe. And that's very different from what feels familiar or comfortable. So I'm going to drop into two different dynamics here, okay? So toxic dynamics and ambivalent dynamics. Toxic dynamics, okay, are about, relationships where something is intrinsically net negative to you. And there will be some good stuff, which is why you stick there, right? Nobody just is a sucker for punishment, even if you're the biggest masochist. There has to be a benefit for you.
yeah,
Or maybe, you feel good feeling sorry for somebody or so whatever it is. The human mind is very, very complex, not here to judge about that.
yeah,
But basically, and a lot of these toxic dynamics tend to be intertwined with personalities who are your Machiavellians, your narcissists, your psychopaths, your sociopaths. And these people are out for blood. They pick the victims and they like it this way because it gives them a kick. There's a sadistic element towards that. And the element of abusing you makes them feel good. And gaslighting you, confusing you, seeing you in a state of confusion and dazedness. They like that. But let's talk more about ambivalent relationships that also are net positive in terms of interactions and also net negative. Okay, so you never really know how you stand with this person, and because of that your body is actually incredibly confused, and studies have shown that this is horrible for your cardiovascular health, your blood pressure, your brain, and just the way you see yourself generally. So the environment that you choose to surround yourself with, isn't just about what you are born into, what you're given, or like what you had no choice because you were in a certain situation in your life and this people happen. Yes, like but think about this as we live in different chapters of our lives, and even if we have such people in our lives, it doesn't mean we have to bring them forward with us, especially if we've outgrown some people or the dynamics are just increasingly intolerable. even after you have stated your boundaries and told these people. And really, when you start clearing these people from your life, you would actually see discernible health changes to your body. So,
Hmm.
for instance, a lot of women tend to have issues to do with their nervous system. They tend to have IBS related issues as well, and chronic pain. And plenty of times, this is not
Yeah.
believed by
Fatigue syndrome,
traditional health, not
fibromyalgia.
at all, right? And often, like in my clients, what we have seen is that when they rid their lives even of that toxic coworker who was actually giving them 80% of the headaches, then something changes in their health.
Yeah.
Their gut suddenly feels great. Their emotions suddenly feel a lot more regulated. And so here the lesson is, don't just tell yourself, it's okay, it's only 5 minutes. No, it's not 5 minutes. It is the price you pay on your health. Compounds in the wrong direction.
And then it kind of builds up like a chronic stress, right? It's
Oh,
not
totally.
only 5 minutes rule anymore. It just
Yeah.
builds up as chronic stress.
Yeah.
And what you just mentioned in the beginning, um, about not breathing right because you're
Hmm.
tensed, I think that on a continuous level, in
Yeah.
that manner, negatively then affects the body.
Definitely, it's like you're dreading it, so it's not that 5 minutes interaction, it's actually like the before, the during, and the after. And also like some of the things that they say that make you question yourself a lot. And while it's important to play devil's advocate to yourself, because I believe that's how we grow, it's only important to do that with people who have our backs, people who are actually wise and give us the right questions, not people who are intentionally doing all those things to throw us off kilter just for the hell of it.
Yeah, yeah. So, now something that comes to my mind, which I would like to ask you, if an individual finds themselves in such a situation, right, and let's say, hypothetically speaking, it's difficult to uproot yourself,
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
from a
Okay.
situation like that, and
Yeah.
and so then how does one set boundaries in order to kind of at least achieve or be somewhere, get somewhere,
Yeah.
to manage work as well as their health?
I think that's such a great question because well, some people it's very easy to uproot themselves or easier, for other people it's not. So for instance, you are in a work situation or you're in a certain kind of family, and for instance, one of my very good friends and I, we recently came out with this thing called Asians don't do mental health because like Asians don't just cut people off. There will always be someone going to the hospital bed of a really cruel family member, right?
Yeah.
And or sometimes like other clients that I work with, the situations would be like they've got a family inheritance that's really big at stake, and they can't just walk away like that. It's actually a lot more common than people think,
Yeah.
especially when you work in family offices and think about issues of succession.
Hmm.
So in such situations, boundaries are important. But what really are boundaries, right? So a lot of women, especially those who are recovering from such dynamics, say, oh, I asserted my boundaries and nothing happened. Well, number one, maybe we always break down like, what exactly did you assert. So number one is that they are scripting it wrongly. They're just like rushing through it and not articulating it well. Okay. And two, they don't, most importantly, is that they don't believe their boundaries.
Hmm.
So when you don't believe your boundaries and you say that to a person who's out for blood, then they're going to actually literally deliberately trample all over your boundaries.
Hmm.
Okay, so don't make sure you're really really clear about that when you are um, being able to assert your boundaries, and you have to keep your boundaries really simple, like do not do this. If you do this, I will consequence, and be very very prepared to follow through on your consequence. So let's say at work, right? Because a lot of my clients also happen to have people at work who is toxic. And because toxic people are very charming, they're very good at rising up the ranks. So here is where you have to win the mental game. So not only do you have to keep your mental RAM very, very light, lean, and agile, you also have to make sure that one, you are able to be super aware that this is not about you.
Hmm.
Because when we make a mistake of thinking this is me, we go into this deep cycle of reflection and overthinking where we overanalyze what did I do wrong. But sometimes it's not what you're doing wrong. Well, it's good to be aware about, to reflect, right? But sometimes, if you didn't do anything wrong and this person is just out to hurt you,
Hmm.
then you're actually going down the wrong rabbit hole or going down the wrong investigative trail. And it's like, looking for a problem in the brain when there's a problem in the stomach. It's never going to work, right?
Hmm.
So be aware that it's not about you. Don't take things personally, okay? And then also make sure there's always a trail, a paper trail. So instead of, if this person likes to only call you, say, face to face, sure, keep your call simple, like, oh, only I have 5 minutes, cut to the point, okay? And then after the call, after the meeting, send a very short email that literally is, hey, great to chat at blah 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 time date. We agreed on point one, point two, point three. Thoughts? Done.
Hmm. It doesn't come very easy for many people, especially, for example, I don't want to say, I mean, I don't want to call them as victims, but then, someone who take this kind of a behavior at workplace.
Yeah.
Uh, Most of the times, as I'm assuming that they would be people who are not very strong in their personalities to be able to set that kind of boundary. So if they have to identify, I know it's a little off the topic, but if
Yeah.
they have to identify their workplace, let's just say that, let's just, because this is something would be maybe perhaps more prevalent at workplace. So they have to identify their workplace as a healthy workplace or not so healthy workplace. Would you
Okay.
have, let's say, from the top of your head, any top three, points that they can keep in mind to see that, it checks out as a healthy workplace or not so healthy workplace?
So in a healthy workplace, people don't just agree with each other for the sake of agreeing each other. There's a, we call it psychologically safe spaces where we are allowed to say no and ask why. That is one. And then two, how much accountability is there in this workplace? So when you ask a question, if this happens, and there's like work between teams or work within teams, what do people do to move forward? And teams with high accountability are able to take responsibility, let's say, even in a chain of actions, like, okay, I would, next time I'm going to do this, they know how to troubleshoot without blaming each other, and they're able to work with each other. And then three would be the opposite, like not a sign of a great team, but rather like a red flag is when people say we are like a family in this workplace. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot, especially being written. And I think that's a great thing because the people often think that, oh no, being a family is great, but no, during, actually we're a lot meaner to our family members than to ourselves. It's because we are allowed to show that side of us even if we're not proud of it, right? Like, you come home after 10 hours from work, you're exhausted, and you got no more mental resources left to hold it in place, then you kind of misbehave at home. So if someone says we are like a family in here, sometimes it means we can throw shit at you, and that is not acceptable. And then, it boils back to whether, like, what you say, what a person feels like a victim or they're not strong. Well, like sometimes it's easy to identify with that because of the way that we are brought up, right? So for instance, in Singapore, I was brought up with like stories of like, I need to be nice, I need to be normal, and clearly I'm not nice at all, when I think about it, actually. Um, and I need to not judge people. And when you have all these different ideas, you play nice, you try not to judge. But then, to be able to judge is what the human brain is made for. Like you judge when you have to decide what you want to buy, what you want to eat, or even how to park a car, right? How to turn your car, unless it's a self-driving car. So you got to think in terms of like, as a, especially as a woman, and you are taking on all this crap that people are throwing onto you. Why are you allowing yourself to do that? And what role do you see yourself in life? So for instance, like one of my friends ever talked to another friend saying that, why do you just, they met for the first time, right? And this girl A was saying, oh, I'm the kind of person who just cleans up the messes. And, like if there's a family chaos or family celebration, I'm the person who will just step up and sort everything out. And then another friend was just like, why do you do that? I'm just really, really curious. And then she said that, what happens is you kind of become like the street cleaner or the rubbish bin. And over time, it's not only do you attach the energy to you and people just mess things up and just say, oh, you know what, she was sorted out.
Yeah.
Also, where else do you get the energy to do all the other great things in your life if all you're ever doing is thinking of how you're going to sort out stuff for other people that grown responsible adults can do that themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. So going back to the to our topic for the day, about mental energy,
Yeah.
and so how do you think mindfulness governs all of this? How do you think we can exercise mindful practices in order to build, better energy expenditure?
So I think mindfulness is a great practice in terms of being thoughtful. So, it's not just about only being the present, because sometimes what I find is that Western psychology, what is has been useful in bringing that into the foray, but sometimes there's a bit of obsession with just being in the present moment. But as humans, we also live in the past. We remember, we reflect, right? And then we also have to dream of the future, or we have to basically build ourselves towards going to the future, and motivation and everything else. So so instead of just using the word mindful, which a lot of my clients are quite upset about, like thinking about they have to just go to retreats, and they get shamed for not going to retreats. It's really about asking yourself, how can I make thoughtful decisions about what I want in my life? So, for instance, like if I have 30 emails to answer, maybe 20 of them are just me being nice and answering it, that I don't have to. That actually, and technically, I could answer them all, but actually, I don't have to,
Hmm.
right? And to be thoughtful about the choices you want to make every day. Like, what kind of job do I want to have? These are big ones, right? What kind of family members of children do I want to raise? That's another big one for a lot of my clients. Or how do I want to live my life in the next 5 years, 10 years, or how do I want to die? I mean, those are like really, really big stuff that when you actually think about it, forces you to maybe even make big or small changes to the way you live your everyday life. But being mindful or being thoughtful, it's also down to how am I going to respond to this person in my life, whether this person is a person I love or a person I dislike, right? Am I going to let this person make me lose my cool?
Hmm.
That's another thing. So am I going to keep my head straight? What am I going to do in order to do that? How am I going to choose to, in terms of the exercise that I take in my life? Because physical activity is important. Not only does it regulate your brain, it also grows your brain. So I think that's amazing, right? And what food am I going to put into my body on a day-to-day basis? Because when we are working and we are very, very busy, and we are in a place where that's very cold, that has a pantry full of snacks. And these snacks are horrible. Much as I love them, they are really, really horrible to be reaching for them when I am dehydrated, when I'm tired, when I'm mentally exhausted. Because these foods are high satiety foods. And the thing about that is that when I eat an apple, which has a lot fewer calories and a lot more benefits and water inside there, it takes me longer to eat the apple, and I eat the apple on full. But I can eat 10 bags of that and I am not full. I want more and more and more. That's called high satiety foods, right? And so when I'm in a bad mental state and in an office and I reach out for that, that's going to make me feel worse because that's messing with my body's chemicals. So, if you want to eat fun junk food, do it in a good space because you want to, not because you're tired. And making these thoughtful decisions can be very difficult for us when we are frazzled, when we are working through deadlines or during this very busy financial seasons in the year.
Yeah. I often have asked myself this question, that when someone is struggling mentally and they seek emotional support from food, and then if they try to resist that, is that being good to yourself momentarily, or is it bad? Because, I mean, on the long run, obviously it's
Yeah.
bad. It's definitely very bad.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that individual seeks comfort, and probably he, does feel better.
Yeah. So again, for this, like I've thought about it a long time as somebody who loves food. Like I literally travel to eat. Okay. And this is just like one of the things that really lights up my life. So, and unfortunately for me, I was born loving a lot of junk food too. So, you got to live with how you're wired.
Yeah.
So in that sense, so but then I've also got clients who say reach out for McDonald's with soju when they are in a really bad mental state, and they don't even like McDonald's and soju.
Hmm.
Okay, so the question number one that I always ask the person is, do you actually like to eat that on a normal day? Do you actually like to drink that on a normal day? If yes, your set of mindful actions are completely different from no. Okay, so if so let's talk about the second group. Okay, the people who actually don't even like to go to McDonald's, don't even like McDonald's. So basically, what they're doing that right is that they're ordering that as a way of poisoning and punishing themselves.
Hmm.
So that's a distinction. That's not cool. Okay, but let's say like, you've been a bit stressed, and then you want to go to McDonald's. Like me, like I go to McDonald's like twice a month now, not every day. Okay, and it's a treat, right? But then like there may be a day when it coincides with the treat, and I'm feeling a bit like stressed or anxious or just like a human being, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so one thing I need to remind myself then is, okay, I'm going to use that as a way of comforting myself, and also it's my enjoyment. So like I'm going to be very thoughtful about that, and I'm going to have guardrails around that. Meaning, I don't order three double cheeseburgers the way I used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's number one. And number two is the other big guardrail around that is, if I happen to go into a day where I over binge, I haven't done that in like maybe 3 over years.
Hmm.
Okay. But I know that as a human being, as somebody ADHD, it's incredibly possible. So if I ever over binge, then I'm not going to make one bad day two.
Hmm.
And when I set these two rules for myself, that works. So in the same way that I help my clients to think through the different rules for themselves, because it's very easy to just want to steal somebody else's rules, right? Like wake up at 5 a.m., exercise and walk 10,000 steps a day. You have to think about what's realistic for you. So
Yeah.
some of my clients like to be able to build this rules that helps them
Hmm.
can actually give them a lot of clarity. But it's a sitting down to actually discern and be thoughtful about how you want to live your life that sometimes we don't want to. But
Yeah.
actually we should actually write the user manual for our own lives.
Yeah. Yeah. To clear-headedly think through the entire, process, that
Yeah.
why am I even doing that? So that would be the root cause of everything,
Yes. Yeah.
right? That's cascading down, to me making the wrong food choices in order to seek comfort, and
Yeah.
that kind of just keeps going on. So,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. Now, where I was speaking to somebody some time back, and she emphasized on the importance of resting.
Mm-hmm.
She said something which was beautiful, that um, back in India at school, we used to have something as a normal practice, which was having a resting um, class. So the teacher would typically just ask the children to put their heads down on the desk and just rest for 10-15 minutes.
Wow.
So that was something which is not very usually practiced, but I know that this used to happen back in the days. So, what do you think how important is taking break, and how do you think that kind of replenishes our mental energy again?
Breaks are super important, and we've got different kinds of rest, right? So it's not just about sleeping. So again, like ask yourself what works for you. Some people actually like to nap, some people find it impossible to nap. So don't do something that is too difficult, because you're not going to do it. But rest can be in many different forms, like even the 3 deep breaths, to me they are a form of restorative rest, because it's like me switching on my phone and closing a lot of different apps in the background. That's
Hmm.
how I reset my brain, right? Other kinds of rest for people who find it hard to nap could be, let's say they go and take a quick walk, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. Make sure that some other kinds of rest is just sitting down and reading something light, if they like to read, and making sure that you're drinking water
Hmm.
or herbal tea instead of something that is completely caffeinating and dehydrating your body. Well, like I love caffeine, I love coffee, but we also have to make sure that we adjust for what we're putting into our bodies. So this rest is restorative,
Hmm.
it's resetting. And for people who hate resting, I say it's a weapon, because basically good sleep grows your brain, because not only are you discarding all the crap that you don't need from the day, you're also restoring what's going on in your organs at different times of the day. I mean, like in Chinese medicine, we have different hours where different organs are restoring. And I know that in Ayurveda, you probably have something some similar principles as well. So and also like when you're able to sleep, basically you're pruning different pathways in your brain and growing other pathways in your brain. So just from a performance perspective, if you don't care about everything else, this is important. And this is a good basically having enough deep restorative rest is also a great preventative protective factor against your four horsemen of major chronic diseases, okay,
Mm,
especially Alzheimer's.
mm. You were talking something about body's organs requiring the rest at certain
Yeah.
period of time, which is amazing. So you know, there is an established fact about how important circadian rhythm is
Yeah.
for our body. So, do you
Yeah.
think there is some relation to mental health as well?
I would say so. So I think, like, if I'm not wrong, it's Sachin Panda who writes a lot about that, right?
Yeah.
And circadian
Yes.
clock, not wrong. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that is really important, especially if your sleep is not good. So while there's a lot of different practices these days on what we can do to enhance our lives, we don't have to do everything. So let's say so for instance, there's a like when it comes to circadian rhythm, we are told that blue light about 2 hours before sleeping can be really affecting our circadian rhythm, right? And there are also studies that have also recently shown, I think there are review studies, right, that have shown that it doesn't affect everybody. So, well, and some people can feel very, very anxious about touching their phones like 1 hour before they're sleeping. But sometimes their jobs also demand that. So if you're a lawyer working across time zones or you're working in financial markets across time zones, you can't stop that. What are you going to do? Quit your job? You don't just quit the job because suddenly you understand mental health, right? I mean, that is not practical when you've got a lot of different factors in the background, like your kids, education, and everything else, right? All your different things at stake, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So the question I always ask my clients first is like, okay, yes, it's well and good that you think stopping touching your phone 2 hours before sleeping is good for your circadian rhythm, but can you actually sleep well at night?
Mm,
If they can actually sleep well at night, I'm like, yeah, okay, then maybe we can think about that later. Let's focus on what are the parts of your life right now that are not going super well. Like maybe your headspace is a bit clogged during the day. You are making too many mistakes. You're worrying too much. Then
mm,
maybe we should take care of that first. So circadian rhythm, I believe, is really important, especially when you think about longevity and
mm,
protective factors against degenerative diseases when we are older. Okay, um, and it's a good practice to walk towards. But before we think too deeply about that, we have to think about how can we gradually get the fundamentals of our lives as they are right now in a way that's suited to our lifestyle, our goals, and the demands on us.
mm. So, specifically for people who have, let's say, ADHD or hyperactive disorders,
Right.
how would they build resilience? Because their mind is constantly on the run, and it's really working on dopamine. So how do they kind of balance themselves, build the resilience, and also I don't know, how do they even bring the balance between rest and being constantly trying to, you know, trying to be productive? And these are the people who I believe want perfection in everything that they do. So
So,
yeah.
but many different variables here. So resilience is that ADHDers can feel like they failed in a lot of life because like the things that come easily to everybody else does not come easily to them. So sometimes I remember like I've had points in my life when I was younger when I had like 6 months of laundry piling up. I've had like 6,000 emails piling up, and that can, even though I'm doing really well in school or at work, that can make me feel like a failure. Everything can make you feel like a failure. And one thing that an ADHD you have to know is that you have to remember that actually every day that you get through is a day of success. You've got incredible resilience about you. And yes, day to day life can be hard. So let's find ways of making that easier. So for instance, if you have 6,000 unread emails, chances are you're subscribing to many things that you don't want to see. So what can we do to use AI to mass unsubscribe? So I
Mm.
think there's a application called Unroll Me that I've been using for so many years that I just unsubscribe to everything. So basically, don't buy things that you're not going to use. Learn to live your life according to a way that helps your brain to function better. So, like for instance, I might tell people like, okay, turn on your video if you're calling me because otherwise I cannot focus.
Mm.
And it's not about me being completely demanding. If they really cannot, that's fine. But it's about making concessions and asking for what you need. That becomes a win-win. Because if I'm not focusing on my conversation with you, then I may tell you the wrong things, and you may not want that. And then next thing that we're talking about is perfectionism. Is that like ADHDers have incredibly high relentless standards. So the idea here is about us thinking, redefining that into excellence versus everything else. What I call hashtag better than nothing. So like you don't need perfect protocols for your life. That doesn't really matter. But there's some things in your life that you want to pursue excellence in, and you have to understand the trade-off that even if you didn't have an ADHD brain that could do things at speed and then nothing at all, um, what happens is that you have people take time to do things. Like the time that we build in for a project also includes the time that we're thinking, the time we don't want to do the work, the time we're fighting with ourselves, and everything else. So you have to take that all into consideration, and then be able to realistically judge how much time something, how much effort something requires. Is that in your head? Oh no, just five processes. No, it is not that way. And you got to choose what you want excellence in and what doesn't really matter, because if you do some of the things right, it's going to compound. So let's say I walk 2 km a day to start with. That's, I don't know how many thousand steps, but that's not 10,000.
Yeah.
That's still better than having 0 steps, because if my brain tells me I need 10K steps, I'm not going to do it. It's too big for my ADHD brain to actually process. So if I walk 2K, I might end up walking 10K.
Yeah.
About compounding in the right direction and being able to trust yourself as that goes. And then the balance between work, physical activity, and rest is also another thing. So ADHDers can have really bad unrestorative sleep. So you've got to ask yourself, what can you do differently, like to help yourself with your sleep? Some people will take one day out a week to sleep extra, and that what that also means then it's not just privilege, it's the ability to get everything else done so that you have that extra few hours to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. And the ability to walk is also very important for people with ADHD. So it's not just about running or biking, but physical exertion is important. So how do you build that into your day? Some people walk and talk, some people listen to books when they're walking. And while people could say that that's not mindful, you got to get what you need to get done. You have to be practical about your life first and foremost if you really want mental and physical health.
Yeah.
Get to then one level, then you build and refine the system, because you're going to keep outgrowing yourself anyway.
Mm. Yeah. And it's not one solution for all, right? Whatever works and build moderation, be realistic at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to make sure that I ask you all the questions that I intended to.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to know, how does technology come into the picture to help and support, um, our mental and physical energy management?
So I think technology is fantastic in that sense. We're living in a complete golden age where we can test for certain variables that can affect us. So preventative factors, protective factors, especially when it comes to, say, down to our blood work. Like for instance, we're thinking about cardiovascular health. I think that is fabulous. But then also we gotta be able to draw the line. So yesterday I was reading about how there's excessive amounts of MRIs being done as protective preventative work, and there's this British neurosurgeon who calls it VOMIT because there are too many false positives. So he calls it victims of modern imaging technology. Vomit. I thought it was a nat geo, and I thought it was really funny. So it's about yes. So I want to learn, I want to prevent, I want to understand my markers, I want to understand my family risk factors. But at which point does it take me too far?
Hmm.
And then, like, do I need 5,000 different apps to track myself? Actually,
Hmm.
no. So it's about choosing what you really need, right? So for instance, like for some clients, being able to be accountable to how much they're moving. Okay, health, your health app on your iPhone, that's more than enough.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't need to look at 1,000 different variables unless, let's say, that's your job, that's your competitive athlete, and there's some things you definitely need to change, like your VO2 max, whatever. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's about understanding where that line goes. And then obviously, AI can teach us a lot of different things, right? About our health that we can just input into the systems. Again, like I think being able to spit out um, recommendations that tailor to us is great, but at the same time, we have to be aware about where all these variables, how they sit as well. Down to the whole like ways in which they're designed, because not all variables are going to be useful for us, and there are some variables that are not being considered over here. So, much as I love technology, I think it's important to understand how the technology works instead of just grabbing onto the next shiny new thing.
Yeah, very, very, very important to understand what I need as
Yeah.
and I also kind of feel that this is where I think precision health is moving towards. There are some factors which are non-modifiable, right? So to understand those non-modifiable of health, you know, which is unique for the individual,
Hmm.
should help them to then craft the modifiable factors around them in order to achieve the optimum, physical wellness and mental health as
Yeah,
well.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. If you had to maybe give me like top 10 lifestyle habits
Yeah.
that can enhance and optimize mental well-being as well as physical health, and also help an individual to utilize the mental energy in the most optimum way possible, and what
Okay.
those lifestyle habits be.
Well, 10. Okay. So let's say walking. I think walking is really, very important. You don't need to necessarily do long walks. If you don't like to walk in nature, walk in a shopping mall. Do what works for you in order to sneakily pop that all in. Okay,
Yeah.
two, sleep slash rest. Okay, find the sweet spot that works for you. It's not just 8 hours for everybody. For some people, it's a little naps throughout the day. Just be really, really practical about it. Three, something that restores your sense of awe. So I think it was 2 years ago when the concept of awe walks came up, about how you go to nature or you go to places with stunning architecture or great viewpoints and let yourself be filled with a sense of awe, because that connects you to the wider world around you. And I think that it's very important to keep putting that into our lives here and there, just so that we stay connected. Okay. And four would be healthy environments, people around you. So choose the people around you. Five, it would be digest emotionally everything that's happened to you. Well, this is not about being obsessed with your whole past. It's about, there's some things that happen to us, some chapters that close, that we need to process. Because, and you may ask yourself, like, oh, no, people in different generations did not process. People on certain cultures don't bother about that. They just cope and soldier on. Yes, but the word here is cope.
Hmm.
Coping is 2000, no longer valid for today, unless you got like a chronic health thing you got to manage. Everything else is about mastery, because if you soldier on and on and on, you're just adding to the pile. It's just growing bigger and bigger and bigger,
Yeah.
and the longer you leave it there, the harder it is to process. Then you're
Yeah.
never going to process it. It's like, imagine you tell yourself, after, like, you got a day of 10 meetings, right? After every meeting, you just tell yourself, that's fine, that's fine. End of the day, I'll just write out my notes. By the end of the day, you've got 10 different meetings to account for. You're never going to write your notes because it feels like an amorphous mess or a tumor. But if you actually spend 1 minute to just jot down three ideas after everything,
Yeah.
it is different. So being able to emotionally process, emotionally digest your life is very important. Just down to being able to be reflective, like, oh, I did this because of blah blah blah. It's not about overanalyzing, but rather giving your brain rest, giving your story a chance to come out, because humans live for stories. Oxytocin gets secreted
Yeah.
when we have a story, then we get closure. So that's very, very important. That's number five, right? And six, if you like animals, I think animals are great for your mental and physical health. Not only do cats, birds, not only are they healing, dogs, giving a dog a hug, your hamster, your fish, whatever it is, it can be incredibly restorative. It's a sense of connection, and it's a sense of responsibility and health. And also it helps protect people. So, like some people who are very, very anxious, if you give them an animal to care for, because they actually love animals to begin with, okay, not just a random thing, then they end up worrying about the animal instead of worrying about random stuff,
Yeah.
about worrying about the recycling. And I always say, I'd rather you worry about the animal than the recycling because
Yeah.
it's actually valid and you actually love and care for the animal. And there's a two-way kind of healing. Okay, seven. Okay, something that, yeah, something that grows your brain. Okay, so like again, there's no prescription. It's about something that, gives you mental stimulation, it
Mm.
helps you to learn and helps you to grow. For some people, it's reading fiction. For
Mm.
some people, it's reading nonfiction. Okay, for some people, it's learning a language. Whatever it is, don't just do it because it's a cool, trendy thing in the States, but rather it's something you always vibe with. And I think that people have the best intel about their own selves just based on their own lives. Like, think back when you were five, when you were six, what do you really love to do?
Yeah.
I think that's a good source of information. And what were you saying just now?
Now, I was just adding a
Yeah.
couple of things that you've already mentioned in the beginning, which was something that you very nicely said, cleaning your mental table. So,
Ah,
whatever that helps someone to perhaps do that in order to get back that rejuvenate themselves mentally again.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And also, you mentioned, which I would like to add to this,
Mm,
was understanding the boundaries,
mm-hmm.
as I think it is just something that we all should practice. What do you think?
Yeah,
This is something which would come to an individual as they practice, as they grow, or kind of weave this into their daily lifestyle habit.
definitely.
Becomes their
Yeah.
second nature. Yeah.
Yeah, boundaries are like I would put it as eight because boundaries are so important. The ability to say no and believe in your no, because you could take on everything and then you will do nothing,
Hmm.
or you will die with nothing because you'll be so exhausted. And being a martyr doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And let's see, nine. Nine would be do something that really makes you smile, that gives you that sense of peace. Because,
Hmm.
like, peace is underrated, but peace is so big because peace helps you sleep well at night. Like, for instance, every night if I ask myself, like, am I going to be able to sleep well tonight? If I know I'm going to sleep well, generally I do. Then I know that generally my life is peaceful, and for me, that's one of the biggest markers for my life. Okay. And 10, ask yourself what connects me to a bigger sense of purpose and meaning in my life that I can keep doing because humans are meaning making creatures. We feed off meaning. So, meaning could be something you do in your job. Okay. It could be something that you do with your family, a legacy that you're leaving behind, something you're doing for, populations that cannot fend for themselves as well.
Hmm.
So whatever it is, again, like in all these 10 different layers, it's not about what somebody prescribes, what is interesting or cute or whatever else. If yes, try it out, curiosity. Not saying don't do that. Like for instance, you may like many years ago there was this thing called unicorn latte, right? You may end
Hmm.
up loving it. I love unicorn lattes. They're fun. They're quite tasty. But it may so test it out with open mind and see what happens. And yes, it is maybe not so fun to have to test that yourself. It's always easier when somebody says, hey, just do this, but this is not fundamental of life, like deep breathing, learning
Yeah.
to deep breathe properly. That's a fundamental that's non-negotiable. Or making sure that your, say, magnesium levels or your vitamin B levels
Yeah.
are good and vitamin D levels are good. I think those, again, that's for me, like it's a non-negotiable for my clients.
Yeah.
Or making sure that you're moving. But everything else, like the way, the shape, the form is something that you have to decide. And I think that sense of creativity, the sense of freedom is important. It's
Hmm.
able to straddle having structure in your life and the ability to make something. It's like your life then becomes a form of art.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, Can you share any examples of personal stories where someone successfully applied these strategies to improve their energy and life?
Um, so when it comes to the breathing one, the brain reset, every one of my clients would do that. So when I sit down with them during sessions, the first time I introduce that to them, I'm like, how does it feel? They go like, oh my God, my brain is clearer. And you can see like from the way a person looks, which is also why I like videos, because like you can see their facial muscles relax, their
Hmm.
shoulders go down, and there's something that you cannot fake, especially the first time you're teaching someone that, right?
Yeah.
And you can see the joy is palpable as they start coming back to you in the future sessions and telling you, I could have lost my cool there at the time, but I just told myself, nope, I'm going to do this. And other things that have worked would be when people are able to assert their boundaries. And especially when they did not believe in their boundaries at first, they're like, oh, I tested it out, it worked, so I did it with somebody else, it worked. And then they start to realize as they peel back the layers, because there's less mental load, there's less crap stealing at the rental building up the rental mental RAM, right? And they say, oh, you know what, most of the drama comes from like person A and person B. And then now that I'm watching, it's just so childish and irritating, I decided, nope, no more. And then the next time they're like, maybe 2 years later, they may message me and say that, hey, I'll let you know that, like ever since, we finished our work and I've been doing this, I've been on this path in my life.
Yeah.
And not only are they choosing people who are good for them, they're able to grow, and they're just making better decisions, because previously, like the different stories that run their lives, different rules of their OS in their head would be like, okay, I need to be kind, I need to, everybody has a story, hurt people, I need to be tolerant, it only takes 5 minutes. But when we examine the fundamentals of how our brain or our bodies run and how we are making these decisions, we start to rewrite them, because some of these rules were not written by us anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, if you have to conclude today's conversation, what would be your last word before we conclude our conversation and move into the next series of exciting topics that we have lined up?
So my last word would be, well, it's not all in your head, but your head saves you.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Perpetua. This was amazing. And I feel as an entrepreneur, I mean, I have multiple priorities on a daily basis. I'm also a mother and a doctor. So I can completely relate with this topic. And this deeply resonates, I'm sure, with most of us. And I think what happens is when we overspend our mental energy, we also tend to equally procrastinate things. I think that is just
Definitely.
the downside of
Yeah.
overusing your mental energy. And to wrap things up, I think our mental energy and physical energy are resources, as what you very rightly said in the beginning, that need mindful management. But I'm sure with very small adjustments like taking breaks, understanding boundaries, cleaning up your mental table, like what you just
Oh,
mentioned, is
totally. Yeah.
yes, and being more, I think, aware of how we spend our time, we can perhaps live a more energetic and fulfilling life.
Yeah.
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 Lovely. But thank you so much. Thank you to our audience as well. And I really hope that you found today's episode valuable. And I look forward to having you join us again for the next series of mental fitness. We have some really exciting talking points and conversations lined up. And we'll look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you again. Until next time, Kush Raho and bye.
Wonderful.